Welcome to the Animal Law Podcast. This is Marianne Sullivan. On this episode, I will be talking with Larissa Liebmann of the Animal Legal Defense Fund about ALDF versus Becerra, in which the plaintiffs are suing the Food and Drug Administration regarding their authorization of the use of a drug known as Experior. And that drug is being administered to cattle in spite of potential harms to the animals, as well as to the environment and to people who either work at feedlots or those who eat the flesh of those cows. The purported purpose of this drug is to reduce the impact on the climate of the ammonia found in cow feces. We're likely to be seeing more and more of this type of greenwashing because nobody wants to just go vegan, which would be a whole lot easier, but I'm sorry, I digress. It's really, really dangerous for so many reasons. Before we get to that, I'll just take a moment to quickly ask for your support for Our Hen House, which is, of course, the not-for-profit that produces this podcast, along with the Our Hen House podcast. If you can, and you're in a place where you're able to, we would appreciate it so much if you would go to ourhenhouse.org/donate. There you can join our flock for $100 a year or $10 a month, or you can make whatever donation you could afford and are comfortable with. We would so appreciate it. I'd also like to mention something that I came across recently, and that's an article that some of you may be really interested in. If you've been a listener to this podcast for a while, you may recall 2 interviews I did, first on episode 10 and then on episode 55, and they both concerned the extended litigation surrounding shutting down Iowa's Cricket Hollow Zoo, a hellhole for animals. The first interview was with Jessica Blome and Jeff Pierce, and the second with Jessica and Amanda Howell. Now, Matthew Liebmann, who is an associate professor and the chair of the Justice for Animals program at the University of San Francisco School of Law, has written an article. It's entitled Litigation and Liberation, and it really focuses on that Cricket Hollow Zoo litigation and talks about how it fits into a broader examination of how litigation can fit into social movement goals. I thought it would be an article of interest to a lot of you, and it can be found in the latest issue of UC Berkeley's Ecology Law Quarterly. You can find it online. And it's so great to see this kind of scholarship around important animal law cases. Now, let's get to the interview. Larissa Liebmann. It just occurred to me that Larissa Liebmann has the same last name as Matthew Liebmann. I have no reason to believe they're related, though I can't swear to it. Anyway, Larissa Liebmann is a senior staff attorney at the Animal Legal Defense Fund, where she challenges cruel and environmentally destructive industrial animal agricultural practices. Prior to joining the Animal Legal Defense Fund, she worked for Waterkeeper Alliance, combating the powerful fossil fuel industry, focusing on the destructive impacts that fossil fuels have on water resources, and she will be joining me right after this. The 2023 North American Animal Law Conference, in collaboration with the Canadian Animal Law Conference, will take place at the University of Toronto, September 29th to October 1st. This is a premier animal law conference, and it is really a must-attend animal law event for scholarship and cutting-edge thinking. The conference showcases the rigor of academic and practitioner scholarship in animal law and policy. It features presentations by prominent scholars from across North America. For more information and to register, please visit thebrooks-institute.org/NAALC-2023. Welcome to the Animal Law Podcast, Larissa.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Now, this is a difficult case for me because it's kind of sciencey and it gets into environmental law, which I will trust your expertise on that. But it's so important because I think it's important in and of itself, and it's important for what's going on in the ag industry about trying to cope with climate change in ways that are probably not very benign, or trying to at least cover up climate change in a way that's not very benign. So it's really important that we be able to use the tools that we've got to counter the industry when they start to do these things. And I don't want to get too deep into the scientific weeds, but we do need to get some information to understand what is happening in this case. So let's start with the facts a little bit. We've all heard about cows and methane, but I am not familiar with the impact of cows and ammonia. Can you just explain that a little bit?
Certainly. Yeah. So ammonia is created from the manure of cows. So pretty much they pee it out. It's excess nitrogen. So whenever they have too much nitrogen in their diet, it comes out in their pee. And of course, at feedlots, this is all mixed together. and then it can either enter the ground and have ammonia, or a lot of times it volatilizes, it's in the air. And it's actually a very powerful air pollutant. It has really bad impacts on people's health, both workers at feedlots and then also communities. Ammonia is a really dangerous air pollutant.
So tell us what Experior is.
So Experior is, not trying to get too much in the weeds in the science, it is a beta agonist antagonist. Technically, that's its classification. So it is a drug that has been approved by the FDA for reducing, and I'm going to say the very simplified version, and then we can maybe get into the nitty gritty to the extent it matters. FDA has approved it for use in cows raised for beef to reduce their ammonia emission. Now, I will give the caveat that, or maybe the detail, that it's only been approved for reducing 16% is what the company Elanco that makes it, 16% reduction when used at 91 days per pound of hot carcass weight. That is important because that means it's not approved. They will not say, okay, if you're a feedlot owner, you can say, hey, my feedlot is producing this much ammonia, because they haven't been able to prove that. What they have approved it for is this reduction in hot carcass weight, though we can test not even that has been shown in the effectiveness studies.
I hate to do this because I'm afraid it's going to get really complicated, but what the hell is hot carcass weight?
It sounds such a gross term. I hate saying it.
It really does.
So once you've slaughtered the cow and I think taken out the innards and things like that, the weight of that carcass before it gets chilled. So it's essentially saying per pound of weight of meat you would be selling this much reduction.
Okay. I assume it's beneficial for them to put it in that way, but I won't go into why. I'm just going to go with that assumption. So that is really interesting, though, because it's really not that much, is it? Like 16% is, I didn't realize from looking at the papers that even the claim is not that much. So how did the animal agriculture industry arrive at this belief that Experior reduces ammonia emissions? I mean, there are beta agonists. I've heard that term before. There are beta agonists used in animal agriculture. Are they all good at this, or did they just come up with this idea that this would reduce ammonia?
Right. So beta agonists, kind of as a broad class, are already used extensively by animal agriculture. So like many people that work on this are familiar with ractopamine, which is a beta 1 and beta 2 agonist. I promise that information will become relevant later because we have different receptors. All animals have different receptors in different parts of their body. And so these kinds of drugs will do different things depending on which receptors they either agonize or antagonize. So upregulate or downregulate. So ractopamine is currently used in turkeys, in pigs, in cows, and it is mainly used for weight gain. It increases the amount of weight they pack on, which makes it more efficient, of course. At the same time, though, it has horrible health effects on these animals that have been documented. It causes higher instances of heat stress. It causes behavioral issues. Essentially, it increases the stress for the animals. So they pack on more weight, but then they're really stressed. They have issues with their hooves. There's higher instances of what the industry calls downers. So animals that fall down and just can't get back up. These are already used widely in the industry. It's actually banned in 160 countries, but the US and a number of other countries still uses them in their meat production. So this is already, just to kind of give the background of the use of this class of drugs.
Right, yeah. So now you're just talking about beta agonists in general, because you can't really talk about Experior because your whole argument is that we don't know enough about Experior because the research hasn't been done. Is that right?
Well, we do know a little bit about Experior.
Okay.
We do know it is similar but different to the drugs that already exist. And I think that's the reason that Experior really set off alarms when it was approved by FDA among people that are keeping an eye on animal drugs, because we knew it was in the similar class as things like ractopamine. And we knew that ractopamine has been shown to have awful animal health impacts. But importantly, especially once you dig in on Experior, it acts a little differently. And Alonco would say, oh, well, because it acts differently, it means it won't have the same animal health impacts. However, our argument is that, and the administrative record shows this, is that they didn't actually study Experior properly because they didn't look at these different impacts. Yeah, and let me know if you want me to go into a little bit more of the background on how this drug came to be, because it's actually a very interesting.
Well, if it's a good story, it won't take us too long. I'm kind of interested to hear. Though I also want to hear you. We've talked a little bit about the harm to farm animals of these drugs generally, and probably of Experior, but as you said, the research is incomplete and they're making different claims. But tell us a little bit about the background of how it came into being. And then also, we've talked about the harms to the farm animals, which of course is a huge concern to our listeners. But I'd also like to talk about the environmental harms, the food safety harms, the health harms. So I do want to get into that as well before we even get to the case. But if this is an interesting story, yeah, tell us. How did it come to be?
So, and I think for people that work in pharmaceuticals, this is probably not a surprise. But for those of us that don't, this was my first case, definitely dealing with this. Pretty much the company that, discovered this drug, and I think this is actually how many drugs come to be, is they found a drug and then they had to try to find a use for it, essentially. So first they tested it. Oh, can we use it as a human drug for this and this and this? And it didn't do any of the stuff they wanted it to do. Eventually they landed on using it in beef cows to reduce ammonia. But it was just interesting because it clearly was a solution in search of a problem. It was the approach. And it was clear, they kept trying. Well, will it do this? Will it do this? And then finally they found something that FDA was willing to be like, okay, we think you can use it.
Yeah. And it really doesn't do it, as you pointed out before, that well, even according to their claims. But let's go into some of the other, not just what it does, but some of the bad things it does, because you've told us about the animals. What about the environmental issues, the food safety issues?
So I guess maybe I can